Somewhere at the beginning of time, we experienced the Big Bang. And fast forward, here we are. So the question that we ask ourselves is, where did we come from? And where are we going? How did we get here? Why are we here? And the practical reason to ask this question is because it gives our life direction. It gives meaning. And we create meaning. We are the creators of meaning in many ways for our own lives. There's greater meaning, perhaps, that exists beyond our own subjective reality or understanding of it, but it's kind of like a tree falling in a forest where if no one's around to hear the sound, did it make a sound? So in the same way, this is kind of a question of perception, but in the same way that, you can say, is sound a direct product of someone being able to hear that sound? Of course, sound is just vibration, so in many ways, of course it makes a sound, but obviously we're applying this to the idea of meaning. And if there is no subject to create meaning, is there still meaning beyond what we create of it? And there are wisdom teachings, traditions from all around the world that address this or wrangle with this idea of where did we come from, where are we going, why are we here? For as long as recorded civilization, we have asked these questions. And we've come up with some very fun and interesting and wacky and scary and exciting and brilliant answers. And of course this, in ancient times there was a lot of creation stories, myths about how the world was created, and whether it rings a bell now as being true or not. It's simply the process of explaining how we got here in a way that gives meaning to a group of people. And while we may no longer feel that it makes sense to have Earth or the solar system or the universe somehow be on the back of a giant turtle swimming through the universe, or other stories like that, there are certain stories and mythologies that have pervaded throughout history. And history is a funny concept in and of itself, in that in this moment in time, we're experiencing something like a condensation of time or of history, something like that, where everything just seems to be piling on itself and reiterating itself more and more throughout our own human-created activities, more than anything else aside from human consciousness and the technologies that we're creating in the world. And so the question of why are we here becomes more important now, more than ever. And of course, you could always have said that at any point in history, and yet right now feels like a particularly unique, a different time to be alive than any other time in history. And yet we can also see that perhaps this process has been going on much longer than we realize, of humans going through ages and eras that we for all we know, could have created civilization multiple times. In the simplest terms, that ancient Egypt was reduced to rubble after being almost spontaneously appearing. Essentially, there was no rise of Egypt in a traditional sense of a civilization. There was merely a fall. We see how civilizations, in this sense, or at least empires and that sort of thing, don't really last. And we have to ask why that is. Is it just the nature of mankind or of the earth itself to just let things grow and then perpetuate and then eventually deteriorate and be recycled into something new? Or is there something about human nature that we are learning to integrate within ourselves, within the collective human psyche, of how to maintain a stable civilization? And history has been marked by war, perhaps more than just about anything else, other than perhaps inventions and saints, that we have this great experiment of humanity. And this experiment is kind of like a runaway journey of who knows really how we got here and what we're doing, but it does feel like we're doing something different than any other creature on Earth, that's for sure. We're doing something different than any other planet in our solar system. And this could be the greatest show in the universe for all that we know. That what is happening on Earth right now is unique. There are life forms that have reached some level of sentient intelligence, us, and now we are in the process of going to the stars and learning about neuroscience and developing genetic and nuclear technologies and artificial intelligence. And our society and the values that we place on certain things over other things determines the direction that the society goes. And in this moment, there is a great number of questions about where society is going. The term has been coined the meta-crisis, and this isn't necessarily just a grappling with existential questions, but it ultimately kind of ends up being that especially with the environment and ecology and the health of people and the land, that it feels like we're casting off an old layer, an old shell. In yoga, there's this term called the yugas, that we move through these cycles of ages periodically. Generally, it's thought to be in conjunction with the precession of the equinoxes, this 26,000 year cycle where we spend a few thousand years in each sign of the zodiac, and this is why people bring up the idea of the age of Aquarius and all this idea of a new Earth and where we're going as a species and raising our vibration, raising our consciousness to be able to withstand change. And there's a certain degree of heaviness that we are letting go of as a species. We can call it intergenerational trauma. That there is a long arc of history that is embedded in our DNA in each one of us, and it's up to the individual to work on that within themselves. That in changing the world, the only thing you have to do is change yourself. The world is a mirror for us, and this is one of the simple ideas that you create your reality. That in order to let go of fear, 1, and karma, 2, that Jesus, in simple terms, just said, fear not. Fear keeps us magnetized to the things that we're afraid of. So if we focus on the things that we love and enjoy, we bring those into our life. If we focus on fear, we bring that into our life. So fear not. Even when things seem crazy on the outside. That in Sanskrit there's a term called lila, that life is God's dream, it's God's lila, it's a play. It's a drama, it's a comedy, it's all of it. And for us to see our role in this world as that, as a role, to see everything playing out as a play, that we can have a certain level of non-attachment or dissociation from experiences of life while still remaining compassionate and engaged in the process. And that's at least one perspective on releasing fear and letting ourselves feel a little bit more lighthearted about this whole experience of being in a human form on this planet that is different than perhaps where we were before we were on this planet, if that's something to think about. And there's a certain remembrance or memory. Another Sanskrit term is smriti, which means divine memory. Remembering who you are, remembering yourself, is remembering who you were or what you were, where you were before coming here. And it's not a question that we bring up too often in society because we have things to do, and wondering about these things seems frivolous, and it's also a direct connection to our direction in life and where we're going. So while it feels like it's not a question that's asked ordinarily, it's a question that perhaps is worthwhile to ask at least once or once in a while. So we're all here on Earth, and we have this experience of feeling like this Earth is our home. This Earth is a beautiful living being. It is our life support system. It's our everything in many ways. And to treat it with love and respect is to treat ourselves with love and respect. That our relationship to Earth mirrors our relationship to ourselves. And when we can get into a positive flow, a dynamic flow of energy exchange where we feel regenerated by our connection to the earth, to other people, to our work, to our play, to our home life, to our spiritual practice, to our hobbies, when we feel this deep connection and positive flow, that brings us into a resonance with earth and why we're here. And at the same time, coming back to this idea of smriti, or divine memory, we are still aware that there's clearly more than meets the eye when it comes to life here, that the only things that are real in many ways are the things you can't touch or see or hear, like love being the main thing. And there's signs, and at the same time, it's invisible. And our thoughts are invisible for the most part. And at the same time, we wear them on our faces and on our bodies. So there's something that we can work through there, that everything that in the physical body is manifested as a thought first, and by understanding this connection between all these layers within us of the physical body and our emotions and our thoughts, and how we can start to retrain our thoughts to be, the word I enjoy is upful, but vibrant, light, radiant, positive. That we can acknowledge the shadow and the darkness and allow that to have light shown on that part as well, because that's what light is for. And a room can be dark for 1,000 years, and as soon as you open a window or open a door or whatever, and light comes in, and that room is instantly light, filled with light. And it's a saying from Yogananda. So anyway, so getting back to this, the first thing was letting go of fear, and the other thing is letting go of karma. So this is another piece from Jesus, who just said, forgive, like simple. Remember to forgive. And forgive others, forgive yourself. Sometimes it's better to not do forgiving others in person. It's okay to inwardly release your feelings without having to interact with the other person. That the more that we practice this, the more that we are given forgiveness as well, that we bring this to us. That in the process of letting go of the past, forgiveness is the key. It is a simple act that lets us be in the present moment without prior definitions, and gives us the opportunity to be free from those definitions of how I was, or how another person was, or the way things have to be because that's how they were. And there's also infinite ways to be creative and to expand your perception and to be a new version of yourself. And each new day you can wake up as a new person, essentially. Like that idea of Groundhog Day, where you have this opportunity every day to be a new person, to change something for the better. And that this is perhaps one reason why we're here, is to learn how to release from cycles that keep us caught in bondage. That's a definition of karma. And that these cycles are, there's the cycle of reincarnation, essentially, is an Eastern concept that we are here working out our karma, essentially, that our karma is essentially the past action is what karma is, and that we do not have to be bound by our past action when we learn how to release those seeds within us. And this is a central idea in yoga and many other, generally like Eastern traditions, and it's mirrored in the Western traditions with the idea of forgiveness. And a lot more that we're not going to go into at the moment. And so there's this universality of these concepts that whether they came from someone in Europe or someone in Africa or someone in India, or wherever, there's a deeper understanding that even if the messages are different, they all end up saying more or less the same thing from different angles. And it's like that picture where there's scientists and they're all blindfolded and they're looking at an elephant, or they're not looking, they're feeling an elephant, and one person's feeling the toes, and he says, "Oh, this must be a very nice rock or something," and then someone else is feeling the trunk, and he's like, "Oh, maybe this is some sort of weird snake thing," or someone feels its back, and they say, "Oh, this must be a nice rough leathery thing." And all the scientists then have to guess and figure out what the thing is. But it's an elephant. And the whole notion of understanding truth, and this is one perspective, is that everybody has a piece of it. And that truth is something that's subjective in one sense, and perhaps also it is objective. And when we're figuring out what this all means in practical terms, that there's inborn intuitive intelligence in each one of us that is capable of recognizing that we are not beholden necessarily to other people's version of the truth. And there are certainly ways of feeling or discerning what that truth feels like when someone else is speaking it and it resonates with you. But that is the simplest, is that if something resonates with you, that's a good starting place. If it's from, an outside source. But like the Buddha and many others would say, is rely on your own direct experience. Don't listen for what other people say just because they're saying it and then taking it as your own. That's the difference between belief and experience. That belief is based on something that we can't necessarily directly experience, and this is deeply ingrained in a lot of areas of culture. And to be able to have the experience to know, there's this simple idea that there's a lot of things about belief systems, but a funny one is, just because I've never seen my brain, does it mean that I have a brain? Just because I haven't seen it, I must believe that I have one because people have said for a while now that we have brains, and that, when people do surgeries, they pop open people's heads and they can do brain surgery, and people surely have brains. But if you've never believed that you have a brain, and at the same time, it's like, can you prove definitively? And so this idea it's funny because it gets into the paradox of logic. And this, it sort of like moves, it must always be important to be practical in your thinking process about things that are not tangible, or things that you can't experience necessarily like with your senses. And this is the process of perception, the expansion of perception. and expansion of perception beyond the physical senses. And this gets back to the very beginning of what is meaning. That we are meaning-making creatures. We create belief systems, and those serve as a proxy so that we can make decisions in life. Like, I've seen a chair 1,000 times before. I think I know that if I sit on this chair, it will support my weight, kind of thing. And I know that that's something that I can generally rely on. And so I have a belief system about chairs in some sense. And at the same time, like, it's not, you might say that that is not a belief system. That's just a categorical process that the brain goes through about what this object is that is a chair, and then knowing that even if you've never sat in a chair before, you don't have to go walking around it looking at it to figure out if it's okay to sit in. You just pull it out of the table and sit on it, and wow, look at that. And so these meaning processes that we have, or belief processes that we have, are to sort of serve as shortcuts for our brain, so we don't have to constantly be doing this thing of discovering things that are similar to other things. And at the same time, when we come across something new, then we do go into this discovery mode or experience mode, and that places us in a much more unknown and yet empowered place to really activate our awareness and our ability to use our senses to perceive the things that are behind the things, like reading between the lines in what we're seeing or experiencing, to have a greater depth of awareness or perception to our daily lives. And once again, that's a very important piece of this, is to lift our awareness, to bring us into a state of remembrance of why we're here, and to be aware of our ability to increase our perception. It's something that's very central to Eastern teachings, and in many ways even just the academic process of learning and constantly expanding knowledge in that sense. But this isn't about expanding knowledge, about just the ability to read books and memorize information and have core competencies and that kind of thing with subject matter. This is different. This is beyond thoughts. It's beyond words or our ability to use at least our five senses, you could say. In ancient Egypt, there was a process of initiation for those who were connected with the high priests and the pharaohs, and they believed that humans had 360 senses, that not five senses, but 360 senses, that there was, for every degree in a circle, there was one sense that could be represented. And the initiates of ancient Egypt, whether this was the Melchizedek order or others, there was a process of bringing initiates into this process of becoming aware of all these 360 senses. And there's different ways of explaining that, but it's obviously like the simplest thing is when you use your mind, so to speak, to make a list of grocery items, and then, whether you write that list down, you're making little shapes with words or with letters, and then those letters translate to sounds, but those sound letters translate into actual physical items at the grocery store. You write all that down, say at home, and then you don't bring your grocery list, but you remember your grocery list, and you're just picturing these shapes and letters that you wrote down at home on this piece of paper, and you're using your photographic memory or that kind of thing, just memory in general, to then go to this store and as you're mentally going through this list in your head, pick out the items in the store. And that's a very simple thing that many of us have done, and yet it's not necessarily something that you would say is immediately defined by our five senses. It's something that requires the five senses, but it's well beyond the immediate ability of our five senses. And to just recognize that we already are using these faculties of mind beyond the five senses. And there's this term, another Sanskrit term called the siddhis, and siddhis are essentially abilities that are awakened in those who have a deep connection in their practice. And a simple one, if you read Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which serve as, in many ways, a foundation for modern yoga philosophy, Hatha Yoga, that Patanjali's Sutras speak about these different practices, and then the end result of the siddhi, or the power, so to speak, gained from that. So one of them, a simple one, is if you always speak the truth, then you will be able to manifest anything with your speech. And there's something, I think there's like 50 of them or something, of these siddhis or powers, but they're powers that you're not really supposed to focus on. The whole point of the siddhis is, if you do happen to have one or multiple or whatever, that it's not, the purpose is not just to use it for whatever purpose. You can use them in the right scenario at the right time, given there is a synchronistic reason for it, and that there's the misuse of siddhis leads to the loss of them, or something like that. That the more you develop, the more powerful you become, the more your capacity to, the higher you go, the higher you fall, or the however that you want to say that. So there's a great deal of discretion and ability in this ancient concept that's embedded in yoga. And another simple one is just being able to read into the past or the future, or to read people's thoughts. All this kind of paranormal or esoteric, or however you want to say that. But all of that, the way that we think in modern society versus the way that other cultures have thought for many thousands of years is very different. And so what we call, impossible or whatever, is just a different side of the way we believe in things and the way we've experienced things. And, we're currently living in mythologies that are embedded in our modern culture, but we're sort of blind to it. It's like a fish in water. And what is water to a fish? So we have a lot to become aware of the stories that we're telling ourselves, and how this collective dream that we're dreaming together is shaping reality. And back to this idea of the siddhis, is that you could say that with technology, technology itself is kind of like a siddhi. It's kind of like a superpower. And especially with artificial intelligence now, that we've reached a stage of power where we have a impetus, a very good reason to know how to use power properly. And power, in simple terms, is just energy. Energy itself, you can say, has a certain degree of intelligence to it, that there are many forms of energy, and at the same time, if we once again, go back to the Sanskrit. Prana is a term that just means energy, life force, the force. That when we learn how to use the force, that if we move into a space where more people become like Jedis, essentially, that there is perhaps some truth to this whole process of becoming one or becoming interconnected at a deep level with forces of nature, at the very least just with our own breath. And this is what it all kind of comes back around to, is our own experience of life. And in this moment, in this reality, as a constantly unfolding process that we are witnessing and also playing a role in and also creating. And so it's sort of this like actor, writer, director experience where it's all happening within us and outside of us at the same time. We are in control of ourselves, but not of the outside world. And in order to, once again, release karma, let go of, things that have happened, to forgive, to let go of fear, to increase our consciousness, to expand our perception, to understand what is beyond the five senses, to be in tune with our inner power, to understand our place of why we're here, where we're going. It all comes back to the breath. And the breath as energy, the breath as power, the breath as even intelligence, and certainly as love. That this energy that we receive from breath, we often don't think about how much energy we're getting from our breath, but we can only go a minute or so without it. So it must be giving us a fair amount of energy, that the synaptic charges in our brain, the literally electric charge in our brain, is from oxygen. It's from this catalytic process going on within us from breath. And breath is certainly not the only form of energy that we receive. Obviously, that we can receive energy from food, or we receive energy from our friends and socializing and being a human being, and without, directly ingesting anything. Or we receive energy from the sun, we receive energy from water, and we are connected to deeper sources of energy. And this is sort of like the cosmic battery that powers us. And we're in this soup of energy that we're breathing. And the breath, if you were to say, how much energy do you get from food? Well, we know, based on the recommended daily allowance of caloric intake, that approximately 2,000 calories is what the average human needs to survive and or thrive, or however you want to say that. That's a very simplistic scientific way of looking at it. At the same time, you say, how many calories do you get from the breath? How much energy do you get from the breath? And the question is, well, obviously there's none, and at this 0 calories, very much energy. And to come to realization about that, we are much more dependent on this 0 calorie energy source than on food, and at the same time food's delicious and very useful. And the energy that we receive from air is lighter. It has a different quality than food, and this is why it's also accessible all the time. And so we have this ability to tap into the energy of our breath at any moment, which is wonderful. And as we deepen our connection to the breath, we understand that we feel relaxed when we take a few deep breaths. We feel that perhaps there are changes that happen in us, and scientifically, changes in blood chemistry, the pH balance of our, gut microbiome or of our blood itself, all of the physiological changes that happen when we start taking slower, deeper breaths. The animals that live the longest breathe the least often. That a giant tortoise breathes, 2 to 4 times per minute, whereas humans, monkeys breathe, humans breathe maybe 8 to 10 times per minute, and then monkeys breathe approximately twice as fast as humans. And there's a certain resonant field that we produce in our biome that correlates to the level of stress or relaxation based on our breathing patterns. And so it's not all about breathing exercises. That's a very important part of it. The awareness of breath is in many ways more important, and the feeling of the breath, actually, rather than simply going through the motions, is to be aware of the sensation, the filling of the lungs, the expansion of spaces that perhaps were not previously expanded, and that somehow the expansion of the lungs correlates to the relaxation of the heart, in addition to our felt sense of relaxation that you would say in the mind or something like that. And so as we tune into the breath as this vehicle for our consciousness, and life in general, obviously, that we can have a greater sense of respect and humility for this simple thing that keeps us going, and has I think it was John Muir. It was either John. I think it was John Muir. But when you try to pull it at something, you find it hitched to everything else in the universe. It was either Mark Twain or John Muir. They are both great souls, and they have a lot of wisdom to bring. There's a certain connection that breath has to our entire world, our physiology, our thoughts, our feelings, and to simply remember to tune into the breath and remember your place by slowing down, by looking around and taking a few deep breaths before going on with the next thing. This brings us closer to one another, brings us closer to our sense of rest, relaxation, and our ability to accomplish meaningful things in this world. So I wish you all a beautiful day, a big smile, and a deep breath. Oh.